Earful Tower listeners, it is a Thursday in the French countryside. You're listening to, well, myself, Oliver G, and Kev Hay, who's a retiree from England. He's been here about 10 years, and he's lived in countryside France since he retired. So he's going to talk about how to retire in France, why retire in France, and also some of the pros and cons of choosing to move to France after you finish work. If you think you hear the sound of birds in the background for this recording, that's because I'm sitting on the patio of a lovely Airbnb in Verteuil-sur-Charente. Maybe I can't pronounce it, but I do enjoy the tiny little village that I'm in. So, here comes Slim and the Beast, a bit of music to get you started, and then it's going to be Kev Hay and me talking about retirement in France. Enjoy.
Jump on my back, hold on tight. Do it together. Let's go for a ride. Let's go for a ride.
So Kev Hay, welcome to the Eiffel Tower.
Thank you.
It's not every day that I sit on the patio of the French countryside with an Englishman talking about retirement, but it's a pleasure to do it.
That's great.
So as I said in the intro, you've been in France for a good almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
Let's take it back to the beginning. I know that you were thinking of not even coming to France.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I was fortunate enough that I managed to take early retirement from my work at 50.
Right, that is early.
That was early. So,
how did you manage that?
I was just at a level where I was a mid-level manager, and they wanted to move the old duffers on and get some young blood in. So they offered early retirement for my pay grade. I was in the civil service, and we jumped at the chance. It was great. So
for full disclosure, you and I have sat with a bunch of other English expats in this village of Verteuil talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and you mentioned that you were thinking of other countries, but what was the allure of France? I mean, there'll be a lot of people listening who are also thinking of doing what you've done. What was the turning point that made you think France?
Well, to be honest, we did it on a whim.
Okay.
We came over to France to stay with a friend of a friend in the village we first bought in, which was a little village called Montbrun-de-Corbière, which is down in the Languedoc in the Aude. We came over for a weekend in October. The weather was bad, so we really were stuck in the house a little. And the friend that we were staying with said, "I've got the keys for a couple of houses in the village. Would you like to have a look round?" And we said, "Yeah, great, superb." We did, and we just fell in love with one of them. It was an old 1780s house, I think it was.
Right.
Needed a lot of repair doing to it, but we just walked in the door, Heather, my wife and I, and just fell in love, and that was it.
And this is sort of before, I mean, now in England, I'm not sure if it's the same in America, but I know in England it's very popular, these television shows sort of moved, I don't know the names of them, but moved to the countryside.
Place in the sun.
Yeah,
and
come down to
like
France
that.
and change your life. When you did it, was it a popular thing to do so much?
I think it probably was. I think there was still a fair amount of people coming over to buy. Where we were, it was mainly Dutch more than Brits that were there. Yeah, there's a lot of Dutch down in the south of France, further south of France. But yeah, for us, we fell in love with the house. That was in 2007, so 2 years before we actually moved. So we used it for 2 years as a holiday house.
Oh, wow, cool.
So that was great. Then this early retirement offer came along, and we just thought, well, why not? You know, we had the house here already, and the kids were all relatively grown up.
Sure.
4 children we have between us, and they were totally supportive of us, so we did it.
And for you, you're not so far away. I mean, the kids back in England.
Well, that's the good thing about France. You know, for us here, the nearest airport for us is Limoges, which is just over an hour away.
Right.
And flies into, for us, the north of England, Leeds, Bradford, Manchester.
And do you, I mean, even in this village, which we'll talk about in a sec, where I think you said there's about 20% British people here?
Yeah, maybe not quite that. I was just thinking that earlier. We'd probably have 10% that live here permanently.
Right.
And then probably another 5% maybe holiday houses.
Sure. Okay, that's something I want to touch back on later, but do you... I know a lot of Australians and a lot of Americans listen to this show too. Do you find, in your 10 years in France, are they also moving here with the same enthusiasm as Brits are?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know quite so many Americans. I think we know 2 couples that come over, but have holiday houses. And the same with the Australians. But we've got some great friends who are Australian, as you know.
Jim, he'll be listening.
Jim being one, Jim and Don, yeah. Great people who come over fairly regular. Obviously, it's a lot more time and distance to travel than nipping across from the UK.
Sure.
So I think that is a factor, obviously, for people who are buying from the States or from Australia, New Zealand or wherever. You've got to consider the distance and the cost to get here. And you can't really just pop over for a weekend like you can in the UK, I suppose.
Right. And you mentioned costs on the sort of more practical side of things. I know as I've been traveling around France, I've been looking out of curiosity at the real estate, the windows with the real estate pages. Yeah. And I mean, coming from where I've been living in Paris, everything is ridiculously cheap. Cheap
is it?
Compared to Paris.
Oh, here?
Yeah.
Cheap,
I mean, Paris.
Yeah, I thought you meant Paris was cheap. Yeah, no.
Paris, I don't even look at them in the window because they depress you.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is that something that attracted you to moving to France? Because the prices are legitimately like crazy low compared to the cities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, again, if you look at the demographics of the UK, the north of England in general, which is where I'm from, is cheaper than the south. But we found, even from the north of England, house prices, buying here was just a fraction of what you'd pay. And you get a lot more for your money. And obviously this region, the Charente, is a relatively cheap area anyway, because it's quite an agricultural area.
So let's talk about a typical, 2-bedroom house in this kind of village. How much are we talking?
Well, this village is probably one of the more expensive villages in the area because of what's in the village. You've got the chateau, the river, you've got the amenities.
And listeners to this show will, hopefully you've listened to last episode where, not you, Kev, I'm talking to the listeners. Hopefully you guys are listening because I gave a good old review about this place, Verteux. You should check it out anyway. But it's sort of almost more of a touristy.
It is, yeah. It's quite a tourist village. But I'm guessing, you can pick up a nice standard of 2-bedroom house, 50,000, 60,000 euros.
Okay, so 50. I'm going to put that in 50,000 euros for a bit of context for anyone. That's close to 60,000 American dollars.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you're probably fairly close to that.
That's not bad.
No, not at all.
It's kind of, what does it make you think? I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people around the country, especially French people, their thoughts on Paris.
Yeah.
Do you think people in Paris are crazy to be buying a place there?
Well, people in Paris obviously live there for a reason. They like the big city lifestyle. If you're coming to Verteuil or the Charente or the countryside, then obviously you haven't got that. And that's probably one of the factors you've got to consider when you're buying. We bought here and our previous house because it was very much the countryside. We're not big city people.
Oh. You wouldn't be able to have your chickens in there.
We wouldn't be able to have the chickens in
the
centre of Paris. But that is a consideration. If you want the big city, then you've got to travel to it from here.
Right.
Although Verteuil, Ruffec, our nearest small town, is only 5 minutes up the road. We can be in Bordeaux within 2 hours. Right. We can be in Poitiers within an hour. Angoulême's 30 minutes.
Right. Not on a scooter, though.
Not on a scooter, no. Not on a scooter. A little bit longer on a scooter, probably.
What about a few more practicality questions? And this is a question that we got sent in from a listener, Wendy Cox, and I'm reading it out here.
Okay.
She says, what about your circle of friends? Did you find it tough? It's easy for kids to make friends, or maybe even students in the bigger cities. How is it as a retiree?
No, we never found it difficult. And I think, again, it's what level you need to pitch in at. If you want to be involved in the French lifestyle, then you've got to go out and look for it. The French are lovely people, but they won't necessarily be knocking on your door.
Is that right?
Yeah, generally. We all of our street that we live in are French.
Right.
Very friendly, very accommodating, very helpful. But they won't be banging on your door saying, come over and have a drink with us, necessarily.
Right.
But they're always there if you need help. The Brits, on the other hand, are very friendly and very welcoming. So it's what life you want to live, really, at the end of the day. But I don't think you'll have trouble, certainly in this village, if you were living here, making friends at all.
Yeah, so it's a question of perhaps if you're listening to this thinking, I'd like to retire in somewhere in France, maybe doing the research and finding the...
Yeah, and again, depends what you want. If you were out in a hamlet, for instance, with less people there, then obviously it's a little bit more difficult to get that social scene if that's what you're looking for.
Right.
If you want peace and quiet and, you know, a more of a reclusive life, and then that's ideal for you.
So how was it when you moved in here and you moved in next to your French neighbours? Do they come knocking on the door and saying, hey, this is who I am?
No, not they. I think they were a little bit. I wouldn't say timid is the word, but they, you know, they all waved and smiled, so you got a nice friendly feeling. 2 or 3 days later, I think our neighbour across the road, Jean-Pierre, came across and she said, you know, welcome in French. Not many of them speak English,
Right.
so that's another factor you've got
That's
to
something
consider.
we're going to talk about in a moment. That's a big
Right.
part.
Um,
Do they make the effort to speak English? Like, do they do they come over and say, hello, Kev?
No. Well, not that we found in our area
Right.
of the village. A lot of the French obviously do speak English, and you know, a lot of the bar owners and
Sure,
restaurant owners
sure.
will.
Especially here where it's a bit more touristy and
Exactly,
they rely
yeah.
on...
And a lot of the younger people speak English. The people in our street are all sort of my age plus, so they're,
Right.
you know, 50s, 60s, and probably more set in the ways and less inclined to learn a language,
Right.
English being
Right.
one. But yeah, extremely friendly. We've never, you know, in the coming up to 10 years we've lived in France, we've never really had a bad word said to us from the French.
You know the so I got my hair cut at the
Uh-oh.
local barber shop,
Yeah.
and he it was for me it was interesting. His child, who was maybe, I don't know, 10 years old, walked in and turned to me and said, before he did anything, before he talked to his dad, he came in and said, bonjour monsieur.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed because it was so polite
Yeah.
for such a young kid.
Yeah.
So when he left, I said to the not a bartender, he went
The
to the hairdresser. I said, "Wow, what a polite kid!" And then we got talking about politesse, politeness in France, and especially in the village. And I asked him, "Are the Brits polite? Like, do you consider them to be polite?" Because I know in Paris, a lot of foreigners have a reputation of being rude,
Yeah.
right? And he gave a gleaming review of the Brits in the
Yeah.
village. He said they'll always say bonjour. He said they'll talk to him when he's standing in his doorway.
Yeah.
Is that something that you notice living here?
Yeah, I do. I think the Brits in this village, and I'm guessing it's the same everywhere, generally will make the effort. You know, even if you just learn the first few words of the basics of French, you know, the French do respect that you are trying and making an effort. I found the French, and especially the French youth, extremely polite. You know, there's times where we've been out in this village or other villages and, you know, a group of 15, 16, 17-year-olds walk past, and you're always a little bit nervous, you know, not that it is, but certainly in the UK you'd be more nervous.
Sure, right.
And, you know, they're all, bonjour, ça va? How
You
we
mean
doing?"
nervous that they might steal your...
Yeah,
wallet?
you know, just nervous that they might be
Sure.
aggressive.
Of
or
course,
whatever.
of course. Yeah.
But we've never come across anything like that whatsoever
Yeah.
in the 10 years. It's been superb.
Okay,
So
wow.
that's great.
That's great. Goes two ways, polite Brits and polite British
Yeah,
people.
yeah. And I think, you know, it's a mutual respect.
Yeah.
And I think if you know, for people who are thinking of living in France, it's a must. I mean, my French isn't great by any stretch of the imagination. Heather, my wife's, is much better. But as long as you're willing to learn a little bit of French, and then that will develop and grow as you go on.
Right.
And the French do respect that. I think people who are coming to France who are not willing to learn or get involved in French life or culture is missing out on so much. And, you know, that.
How does it change? I mean, like, so firstly, how good is, or how bad, or how medium is your French? If we say 0 is not a word and 10 is fluent for an expat,
I would probably say 4 or 5.
4 or 5,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah.
enough to get by.
Yeah, you know, I go shopping, I'll go to the supermarkets, I'll go to the Bricos and buy screws and nails.
What's a
and,
Brico for anyone who doesn't know?
Brico's like your B&Q in the UK. It's
So, like,
where your hardware
hardware,
shops,
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
where you buy all your bits and pieces, your
Right.
plasterboard or your nails or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever you want to do. So yeah, it's you learn stuff every day, you know, and even if you learn a couple of new words a day, it's great, you know.
And so, I mean, you must have met some retirees from Britain or wherever who maybe don't make that effort, or who consider they're too old to learn a language.
Yeah, you do, and I think
what happens when you meet with these guys?
well, it's just life; it's their choice, you know. Personally, I just feel you've got to make the effort to enjoy the French life and culture.
Right.
And I fully appreciate, you know, my linguistic skills are certainly not good.
Sure.
I find it hard to pick up, you know, the nuances of the French language. But if you don't do anything, then I do think you're missing out.
So what would be your tips? And I'm interested how this would sort of correlate with in Paris, for example,
Yeah.
where like a lot of It's a lot easier to learn in terms of,
Yeah,
you've got school on every corner or whatever.
I think Brits in general, as a nation, are quite embarrassed speaking a foreign language, whether it be French or German or whatever. And it's difficult, I think, because the business language of the world generally is British English. So it makes Brits, not everybody obviously, there's a lot of good language speakers, but I think it makes Brits fairly lazy because other nations will speak English to you. But I think just coming to France, for us, we went to classes when we first arrived.
Were these organised by the town hall?
It was little clubs. There was sort of French, English-French clubs that was a mix of English and French. So we did a bit of that. I came to France with next to no French language at all.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
I knew a few words of Frère Jacques and I could say bonjour, but that was about it,
Yeah.
So a lot of people will come maybe like me with no language skills. Others will have schoolboy language. You pick up on. And I think it is true to a certain degree. The older you are, the more difficult it is to pick up a language if you've never done it in the past.
Sure.
But you've just got to make the effort. There's people like myself. You can't be here for 5 years, don't speak a word of French or try to speak French, and then expect to be fluent in French.
Sure.
You've got to put the effort in.
Yeah, I've learned personally since. So when I left Paris, my French is all right. I mean, I use it a lot and for work.
Yeah.
But since traveling through the countryside, I'm certain that it's improved an awful lot because I've had to use it. Whereas in Paris, I wonder if they do this here, but in Paris, a waiter will often switch to English almost to save time.
Yeah.
As soon as they hear there's even a slight accent.
Yeah.
Especially, and I know a lot of people who are at a really early level of French and they might walk into a cafe and say, like, bonjour, and they'll say, yeah, what can I get you, sir?
Yeah.
And you feel a bit defeated, but in the countryside, it hasn't been like that at all.
I think it probably is, maybe not so much in this village or, in the surrounding area, but certainly if you go down to Angoulême or even in Roufec in the bars in there or the shops. And I think a lot of the French do like to try their language skills out, so they want to speak English to you. And that's not such a bad thing, because what I found is I'll try to speak French and they want to speak English.
Right.
So, I am getting a little bit of French in there.
It's funny when that happens, you're speaking each other's language, almost resisting the change, both of you, which is quite odd when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. It is.
What about overall? So you've been here for 10 years now. Have there been standout difficulties that you still leave you shaking your head?
The bureaucracy, I think, is one, probably. Because when we first came over to France, because we were below pensionable age for the old age pension, the British old age pension, we looked at getting a little bit of work or doing a little bit of work. So we could earn because I did come with a little bit of a pension, a private pension, but we wanted to just top that up to give us a little bit of extra cash. So we set up an auto entrepreneur business, which was really looking after a couple of gîtes, doing a bit of gardening.
So a gîte, like
as a holiday home,
house,
that people rent out. And to do that, if you're doing it legally, you really need to set up an at the time it was called a auto entrepreneur.
I think now it's maybe the micro entrepreneur,
it's changed slightly now. Yeah. And because of that, you've got to do all the legalities, the paperwork, and set up the official business, which was quite daunting for us coming across and not really understanding the process. But there are people about who will help you. You can pay and go to people to do that. We pay all our taxes in France and have done for the last 9 years. So, what we do earn, we put back into the community or back into the French life. And it works well, and I think from that you get the benefits of that. We're in the health system.
I was going to ask about the healthcare. That was another question that we got about the healthcare, which it was also from Wendy, actually. She had a lot of questions about that. But she said the question, healthcare and family, as we get older, healthcare is more likely to be an issue. How do you handle that? I mean, is that difficult?
Well, again, it depends what age you're coming over at. If you're of UK retirement age, this all might change with the Brexit. So,
that's a whole different podcast.
Pre-Brexit, yeah, exactly. You will automatically fall into the French system. And the French healthcare system, as much as I love the UK and the NHS, I've got to say is second to none. It's absolutely superb,
Right.
what we found. If you are under the retirement age, then you need to apply for a carte vitale,
Yep.
Which is like your health card.
Yep. And a whole different podcast episode as well.
Yeah, so there you go. So I won't steal your thunder on that one. But yes, and that's what we did because we were of pre-retirement age, if you like. And setting up our auto-entrepreneur allowed us into the health system, which is one of the other reasons why we did it. We got our carte vitale, which then allows 70% of whatever cost your health costs are to be paid by the French government. The other 30% you've got to pay for yourself, and now you can do that by having private cover, which we do, which can be fairly expensive depending on the level of cover you want. For my wife and I, we're now coming up to 60, we pay, I think, at about €100 a month.
Right, okay.
For mid-level cover. So if we have an accident or we go to the doctors, we know we're covered, so which is peace of mind, really.
Second to none, like you say. That's a good.
Yeah, it's great. It's a good system because people won't just go to the doctors because they've got a bit of an headache. They'll think, well, I'm going to have to pay something if I go, and you do pay up front and then you claim it back. So yeah, it does make people think twice, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, what I thought we could end on, Kev, is maybe you could give a piece of advice. Sorry to put you on the spot, but if you could give, imagine someone's out there who's listening, not necessarily in the UK, they could be anywhere in the world, and they want to come and retire in France.
Yeah.
What's your overwhelming piece of advice that they need to think about?
Do your research, I think. Don't be taken in because house prices are a lot cheaper here. And we probably fell into that trap with the first house we bought. We thought, whoa, it's this price and it's so cheap compared to the UK. And we didn't really then compare house prices around the area. And we jumped in, we'll buy that one. And I think, you need to do your research on where you want to be, what lifestyle you want. If you want the culture and the history and the social life, then there's not much point living in a hamlet, really.
Right.
So you've got to really consider what you want to do in France itself. And if you're coming over permanently, again, if you're coming up to my sort of age, 60-ish, and you're getting older and older, you're going to need those amenities around you. So you don't really want to be stuck in the middle of nowhere if you need the doctors and you need to go shopping. So I would just say do your research, look at the areas you want to be in, look at house prices. If you can visit the area, like any house, visit the area.
And that's a pretty nice research trip as well, going around France looking for places
Exactly,
to live.
yeah. I think you can quite easily. I've got friends who've said, we looked at 200 houses and then ended up buying one that they didn't really want. So, we looked at one house and bought it, just do your research, I think, is the important thing.
Great. Well, on that note, Kev, I want to say a big thank you for being on the Earful Tower. It's a different kind of episode today, not the usual one, but I'm glad that we did it.
Yeah, super.
And I hope that all the people out there listening don't all come and move to Verteuil. But if they do, I hope they
look us up.
Catch them in a bar one day for a drink. But thanks so much, Kev.
You're very welcome.
And I'll chat to you next time.
Okay.
Well, there you go. That was Kev talking all about retirement in France. If you want to hear more from him, he did a live video on the private Facebook group for Patreon supporters, answering everybody's questions. And that's the group where we've also been discussing the idea of an Earful Tower book club. Sound interesting to you? Well, you should be signed up. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. It's all there. And for the rest of you, talk again on Monday. Au revoir.